when I was in situations where relationships weren't um just like evolving, where they weren't growing, where they weren't healthy, where they weren't happy, where it wasn't leading to marriage, I internalized that and I was like, damn, like, am I not a good woman? Why don't they want to marry me? Like I've done this and that, like I'm washing their clothes, I'm making food, breakfast 3 times a day, like, make sure they're good, talking to them about their mental, like I'm doing all this stuff that people say you gotta do to get a man, and like it's just not working. So I would internalize as like there's something wrong with me.
This is Sad Boy Radio.
What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to Sad Boy Radio. I'm your host, Matt, and today we got a very special guest. We got a Chicago DJ. She just opened up Club Yaya over at Twisted Cantina, and you just got placed on your first music festival, My House Music Festival. Go ahead and introduce yourself.
What's good? I'm Yaya The Boss. My real name is Yesenia Chavez, and born and raised from Chicago.
Damn, she gave out the government. I
Yeah,
don't know
you
why
guys
you
know
did
I
all
could
that.
be.
Then they're gonna go Google you now. They're gonna try to. I don't know what they're gonna try to find, but they're
Look
gonna
for me
find
on
something,
Facebook and
right?
shit. Look, I'm all private, so I'm not worried about it. On Facebook anyway. All my other stuff's public.
They're about to find all the articles of you being like a scientist and shit.
Hopefully, they're good. So
How'd you even get into neuroscience? Like, first of all, like we gotta let the people know, right? You're smart as fuck because you're studying neuroscience. That's some shit I would never do. That's too much work for me. I like to keep my life simple. So go ahead and touch on that a little bit.
I'm from the southeast side of Chicago, so for those people that don't know, it's a predominantly like Mexican and immigrant neighborhood, but it's very historic to Chicago because one, it was one of like the um, most prominent Mexican neighborhoods because a lot of immigrants went there to reside in like the 70s because it was like a big steel hub. So U.S. Steel is located there. So like a lot of those companies would supply the metal for the skyscrapers that were built downtown. So there was a lot of like opportunity there, and that's how my grandfather came over. So with all that history there, it was important for me to care for my neighborhood too, because my roots are there, my family is still there. So how I got involved in like community organizing and like I don't want to say activism, but like advocacy work was there was a company that was moving from the north side of Chicago from Lincoln Park coming to my neighborhood. So when I got wind of it, like my first thought was like, okay, like why are we getting garbage dumped in our neighborhood again? And like I kept reading into it and they were getting like new residential buildings, just like a bunch of new shit. So I'm like, that's a red flag. So I kept digging and the whole situation was just really shady. Like they were forced to shut down because they were polluting so heavily in that neighborhood. So residents from there complained and they were basically like, we don't want y'all here. So they were forced by the city to shut down. But the promise there was that they were going to be able to move into my neighborhood. And it got tricky because I learned that like my ward, because Chicago's divided by wards or whatever, is specifically like through policy zoned for hazardous waste. And I didn't know that. Growing up, like I would see like, we have the Skyway go through my neighborhood, so there's a lot of car pollution. We have like the river, so there's a lot of barges and shit. Um, so I saw different types of pollution, but I just never connected the dots. So that was the issue there for me. It was like, okay, we're getting pollution from the north side now that they didn't want, but they're saying it's okay to put in like a predominantly like Latino and black neighborhood. So that got me hot. So I started to reach out, to different community groups and see just how I can get involved, how I can get people aware that this is going on. So because at a young age, like I love science. Like I would do science experiments and like win first place. So it was always like a big thing for me. And that was like my niche with my advocacy work was how do I paint a picture for people to understand how damaging this is or this can be to people's health. And that's where the research component started. I started digging into different articles and research. And the shit that I was finding was like really scary. Like some of the particles that come from like vehicle exhaust, like the big diesel trucks, can like penetrate into our tissues and get into our blood system. So basically, as soon as I experienced all that and learned how like these particles can affect the mental health of children specifically, I was
And
hooked.
that's crazy that you mentioned that, right? The fact that your ward is zoned for fucking what toxic waste.
Yeah, hazardous waste.
Educating people about that situation is what's important because a lot of the times we're not aware of these things that are going on. And that's why people say, there's a lot of disproportionate things happening in black and brown communities. And nobody knows about it except the people that live there, and not even them most of the time know about it.
And the ones that were familiar with those type of situations, like, gave us resistance at first. Like, the people that were advocating to not let this company move in, they were just like, "Oh, well, you're wasting your time. Like, that's just how it is over here." And that was so hurtful because to me, like, it's not like as updated as Lincoln Park. Like, my neighborhood's not like that, but there's just a lot of beauty in it and a lot of potential and a lot of creative aspects that I think are very precious. And I see value in them myself just growing up there. And it was heartbreaking to see that people just didn't feel the same way because of like the systemic shit that's in the way of their vision to actually see something beyond what's presented to them.
So why was it so important for you to inform people about what was going on? What do you feel like you were emotionally attached to that you wanted to save in that neighborhood specifically? Other than the fact that obviously you grew up there.
That's a big motivating factor. But what triggered me to actually like spring into action, because there's one thing, like, it's one thing to read like a piece of news, which is like oversaturated on social media nowadays, and be upset and be like, that's unfair, or that's terrible, or that's really sad, or those poor people. It's one thing to feel that, but then it takes like something personal to engage you and really move you to the point where you start acting. So that piece for me was reading that like this company was going to move across the street, literally across the street from where my sister was is going to high school at the time. And being the oldest sister, like, I'm overprotective of my sister just naturally. But on top of that, there's hundreds of other children that are involved because there's also an elementary school right next to it. So what is that going to look like for them if we're adding, more diesel trucks along the road where they're supposed to walk to school? Like, they're breathing in all those fumes. And this is before I learned any of the research. This is just, kind of like an emotional response. And just learning that they were gonna be across the street from my sister's school pissed me off to the point where I'm like, "All right, we gotta do something about it. Like, enough is enough." I think I was, like, 26 at the time. I'm 26 years old. I've seen this shit my entire childhood. There's no reason, like, my sister needs to have that same exposure.
And how long ago was this?
2020,
So what changes have you seen since then?
there have been a lot of bills and, like, policy passed to get more funding for, like, environmental projects, and then also policies in place where companies like the one we prohibited coming to our neighborhood won't be able to take that same approach anymore. Like, it's going to be a lot more strenuous for them to try and apply to be at places like that. It wasn't ideally what we wanted, but it's a step in the right direction. I think the most rewarding thing for me to look back on is just seeing people like have hope in their eyes again, that with enough, neighbors coming together in general, like, something can actually be done. And now people know that they can actually hold elected officials responsible. I feel like with older generations, there's a misconception that elected officials, and not to get too like into politics or whatever, but I feel like older generations had an issue with challenging political power because there was fear there. And it's just like, oh, well, these people are running our lives in a sense. And they are. But I think younger generations are just more hungry and they're over it. And they're just like, no, in reality, like, we're kind of here to tell you what to do. Like, you're supposed to be representative of the neighbors that are here already.
Making sure that your voice is heard and making sure that things are happening aside from, you know, the everyday politics, like you're saying, just letting them run your life without any type of, I don't want to say consequence, but any type of pushback, any call to action.
Right.
But we're not here to talk about all that. We're here to talk about you and DJing, right? We got a little
I went on
into
my
it.
little
Yeah,
tangent.
we got a
Yeah.
little into it, but that's
Yeah.
okay, right? We're here to talk about you DJing and, really you were able to be booked for a Chicago staple in My House Music Festival. For you only to have been DJing for about a year, right? It's been about a year.
It'll be a year in June officially.
How does it feel?
When I got booked for my house, I didn't know who was on the lineup. I didn't know who the headliners were, any of that. I was really emotional when I got offered, the slot for my house, for the silent disco, just because when I started kind of mapping out my career at the beginning of this year with my manager. Shout out to C's. He was like, "All right, I want to know your goals. I want to know what 3 months, 6 years, what a year looks like, what 5 years looks for you, or what are you trying to do within these years?" And that was one of my goals. But I had it out for the year. I didn't think it would be coming this soon, so that was a really big deal for me. Um, Being in this industry, I still deal with a lot of like imposter syndrome just because of how rapid things are moving. I feel like I I tend to overthink often and be like, okay, well, should I really be in these spaces? Like I only have X amount of like months behind me. Like people have been DJing for years and haven't got this slot before. But then once I hit that crossroad, I'm just like, okay, that means, I'm kind of cold. So that's why they're hitting me up. And if I wasn't, then people wouldn't be giving me the opportunity. So that was my first reaction. And then when I saw the flyer, which is I think posted like 2 weeks ago, I started crying because I saw Marshall Jefferson's name on there specifically. And that was a big deal to me because, I grew up listening to house. Like, I think everybody in Chicago, like, if you grow up here, it's time to clean when there's either Latin music or house. And that was my childhood. And his songs were in rotation. And, my cousins were big house heads too. So seeing his name on that flyer meant a lot because, like, just reflecting on what it took for him to get where he's at and how notorious, he is. And me just being on the flyer with him was insane. I was like ugly crying, like boogers, like everything. My mom's like, "Oh, Mija, that's so good."
Do you feel like it reaffirmed your purpose within this industry?
It did give me a boost.
How so?
But like I was mentioning, like I have my moments where I'm just in my head too much and I sit there and I think like, am I really made for this? Because this industry takes a lot out of you. Like DJing, I feel like people have a misconception about DJing where it's just like, it's really fun. It's like that high energy club shit where, you're just hit after hit and it's just a party. And that's like the end result of everything. Like DJing is like, I think maybe Marcus said it or I saw it somewhere online where it's like you're playing Tetris on level 10 for like hours at a time. But even before you get to that point, like there's still a strategy behind what you have to do. And I had that misconception. So when I started, I was like, holy shit, like what did I get myself into? Because what I yearned for at the time was just like a creative escape where I can like finally get those songs that are always in my head just out and I can hear them blended, you know? Um, so that's how I started. And learning just the intricacies of it and the beauty behind it and the education that has to like lay the foundation. Um, it was overwhelming, but now I'm looking back on it and it's just like I feel like I'm popping off when I'm laying my foundation. So it's really intimidating because I'm like, while I'm getting all these gigs and like this in my head a lot of my homies are legends in Chicago too. I'm like, this legend's hitting me up, like this homie's hitting me up, that are well established in the city and have a lot of respect from other DJs are hitting me up for sets. I'm just like, damn man, like, am I really here? And then that immediate reaction is like fear, like fuck, like can I do this? What if I mess up? But a beautiful thing about DJing is just like when you mess up, you have to keep going. Like it's not like you can stop in the middle of a set and be like, "Oh, like my bad, y'all. Like we're gonna start over. Like my bad for messing up." Like
Let
you
me get a
have to keep
retry.
going, and that's also been a lesson in itself because I'm one to hold on, like hold real tight to experiences and like reflect on them and really dissect them. And like when you're in the moment, the spotlight's on you. Like you're the artist of the party. You're like painting on site, so you can't just stop and reflect for another hour and then get back to painting. Like you got to keep going, and um that's been a beautiful thing to me for me to evolve into is just like learning how to go with the flow. And I think that's the point that I'm at with my career after getting that solidification from my house. It's just like, nah, like you're doing something right. You may not know what it is right now, because you got so many things going on in your head. But you're doing something right. So just keep going with that flow.
And honestly, I feel like almost all of us don't even know what we're doing. And a lot of the times I have these days where I'm literally trying to figure out what's next, what's next, what's next. And that's a problem we all have. We're all trying to figure out what's next in life. Somebody who has everything in life is still trying to figure out what's next because there's always something missing. And when you have that missing piece, it's like it sucks to say, but it's almost like an emptiness, right? And how do you feel an empty feeling when you don't even know where to look, you know? So, I mean, shit, I think that's one thing that we all got to realize is that nobody truly has everything, and we just got to focus on what we can do better and how we can get better every single day.
Exactly.
Just like being a DJ, right? You make a mistake, you got to pick it back up and keep it moving because life waits for nobody. It's never going to pause. For you, what changes have you seen in yourself since becoming a DJ?
When I started to get heavy into it, I had like a tragedy happen in my family where, I lost someone in my family that was very important to me. And the way that it happened was so tragic to the point where I just like was numb. Like I was numb. Like I couldn't even feel anger. Like I knew I was sad, but I was just so overwhelmed with emotion and like shock that I was just like stuck. And I was still going to school at the time, and I'm like studying like science courses that are very intricate and like detailing different motions of the body and different routes and like one of my classes is like biology of the brain, and unfortunately the injury did have to deal with like that person's brain, so I couldn't even walk into class at that time. And like when I experience things like that, I tend to isolate and just like try and ground myself the best way I know possible that I've learned, through different experiences, and then get back out there. And sometimes that's okay, there's nothing wrong with that. But I've learned that as I'm getting older, I'm yearning more social connection. I'm yearning more to have the ability to connect with the people that I've built relationships with and actually open up to them about how I'm feeling instead of trying to dissect everything on my own. So DJing has made me a lot more social in that sense, where I'm able to build with connection. I'm able to build connections with people that like I've known for years that we now DJ together and just open up to them about my doubts that I'm having as a newer DJ and just really listen to them to grow. So it's changed me in that aspect. It's also, I feel like, made me more creative too. Like, it's tough out here, man. There's a lot of beautiful minds that are DJing that are just so creative and so detailed and like just excited and passionate behind the art that like you have to be on your A game. You can be like a DJ for the money, like that's whatever, but I'm the type of person where like if I'm gonna do some shit, like I wanna be real good at it and I wanna make a name for myself. And DJs also put me just on my P's and Q's and really got me through moments where I was just like feeling low and I'm just like, nah, man, like I have so much more ahead of me that I can work on. Like, whether it be a song, whether it be an event, like, it's just something that always gets me back up.
At the end of the day, being a creative is like therapy. You're able to express yourself in ways that are artistic, and you don't have to lean on somebody else. The fact that you're now able to lean on other people and you yearn for that social connection, it's great to be able to confide in other people. But when you're able to use some form of self expression, that's even better because you don't have to rely on anybody else. And I really think about it in the sense that, like, something you mentioned to me was the lack of communication and avoidance of topics within Mexican families, within the Mexican culture. And I pulled the song Runaway from Ed Sheeran. He says, I've never seen my dad cry, coldest stone in the kitchen light. I'll tell you it's about time, but I was raised to keep quiet. This is what I'm gonna do, gonna run away, gonna make that move. And I really thought about that song because even for me growing up, my dad wasn't a very emotional person. We didn't really talk about our emotions. Now, as he's gotten older, he's opened up to more conversation and we definitely had more heart to hearts. But it sort of instilled this thing in me where who do I really talk to? Like, I would talk to my siblings. I would talk shit with my siblings, like, oh man, my dad's on one right now.
Mhm.
But there wasn't that understanding of like, oh, this is going on with you. Oh, it's okay. Like it'll be okay. You know what I'm saying? And for me, being able to be a creative, being able to have these conversations with people, it really became an outlet for me to express myself through music and through conversation. and being able to have that personal connection. It's kind of like what was missing for me because I didn't have that connection with my dad. I was able to gain new connections through other people and make others understand what was going on in my world, and hopefully they felt the same way. How do you feel like DJing has done that for you?
Before, when I used to get in my fields, I would just like sit and sulk in them, and just like sit on my couch and try and watch like I don't know, some DJ video to study a technique, but I would just like be too in my head about it. After just kind of realizing that like, okay, I have a creative outlet. Like if I'm feeling a certain type of way, I know a song that I can match that can probably tell me when I'm feeling better than I can explain myself. So then you start there and then it releases just a bit of for me anyway, it just releases that like tightness that you get when you're trying to figure something out and you want somebody to open up to, but your family may not be that outlet. And for me, that was the case a lot. Like being the oldest daughter, it was difficult because I still to this day feel like a third parent. Um, they call us like the experimental children because, we're freshly with like new parents. They don't know what they're doing. My parents were dealing with like a marriage too. They were trying to be husband and wife to one another. So there's like a lot of things they had in their life. So I didn't really have that emotional outlet growing up. Um, and my cousins were all like pretty big gaps in age, so I couldn't really talk to them much about how I truly felt. So when I started meeting my friends that were DJs, I got really close to them, and then like a lot of them now know things about me that like my family doesn't even know because of how comfortable we've gotten with one another. And then the DJing is just like a little sprinkle on top of that. You know, it's more like the connections behind the people that are creating where we relate, where we have our own individual struggles and we power through them and we do something that we love to create experiences for other people to enjoy their lives too. The little bit or the little moments that we share with one another, have them enjoy those before they go back to those subjective realities.
Say you were trying to convey a certain emotion through your sets. Maybe, obviously, you're trying to have upbeat, high energy, but just like you said, maybe I'm feeling some type of way that I can't really describe to somebody. Has anybody been able to pick up off of that?
I don't think I've practiced it a lot in like public. For me, that's more of like an intimate thing where I use as like a release. I haven't practiced it in public yet, but I have had situations where like life was just like hitting me like from every direction and I had to DJ and I just wasn't feeling it. And I was trying my best. I was mixing my little songs or whatever, beat matching, yada yada. But like in my heart, like I just didn't want to be there. And that recently happened to me where someone's like, "Yeah, your set was it was dope, but I could tell you weren't really feeling it." And in my head, I'm like, "Fuck!" Like that's what I was trying not to show.
So I want to take it back real quick, right? And touch on that lack of communication within, the family aspect. How do you feel like that lack of communication and emotional support has impacted you, growing up?
It's tough because it like translates into different aspects of my life.
Hit it all.
I think the biggest one, or the one that's like most prevalent right now, is like the lack of communication within like marriage dynamics and how that like translates into like the relationships that you end up trying to pursue with other people. And like I learned to be very attentive to body language at a young age because my parents had a tough time with communication during conflict. And like my dad wouldn't really create an environment where my mom was feeling validated. Um, and my mom would get really emotional to the point where like my dad would shut down. So it would just like it wouldn't work. And when that was going on, there was a lot of avoidance, like the room was tight because I knew that they just got into it. And I'm like, man, like y'all can just talk it out, hug it out, but they just wouldn't talk to each other. And now that I'm older, I see like how toxic that is because I'm like, yo, they went like 2, 3 days without speaking. Like this is wild. Like I'm just sitting in the kitchen trying to eat some cereal and they're just like into it. So that's like I did get a skill from that, but the way that it translated into like the relationships that I was pursuing was that I would tolerate spaces where I wasn't being heard, and I wasn't being validated, and I was just being disregarded in general. And that happened for years. Like it started in my early 20s, and then I would argue even like up until recently is when I realized like, okay, like this is where this came from and this is why it's not gonna like why it needs to stop. But that's been the most prevalent one in my life recently. Is just like parent dynamics and their marriage and like how you can continue that with other people that didn't even have anything to do with those situations if you don't stop like those toxic cycles.
I feel like I put myself in the same situations, right? Where, and I think everybody does it, especially when you're learning how to be in a relationship. You're trying to understand, like, okay, what's okay and what's not okay. What am I going to tolerate and what am I not going to tolerate? My parents weren't like that. And I still ended up in situations like that. So I think the way that your parents do communicate and the way that those relationships are presented to you early on, yeah, they're gonna have an effect on what you think an effective relationship should look like, what you think a healthy relationship should look like. But I think that just comes with growing up, trying to figure out what you want and what's worth holding on to. You know what I'm saying? What do you feel like are the values you're looking for now then?
Their family dynamic is like a big thing. Like if I get to the point where I'm serious with someone, like I'm very observant of how they interact with their family, specifically the women. Do they care for the women in their family? You know, if they have any within reach, like do they check up on them? Do they have a stable relationship with them? Is it unhealthy? And then I think just as individuals, just the ability to be like transparent and someone that's just like willing to try at the very, very bare minimum. You know, there's other things like, you know, honesty, loyalty, like the standard shit people be saying. But I think at the very core, like, in order for me for respect to be there, like, there has to be transparency and there has to be like an ability to be considerate to the other person to the point where if you do have to let that go in order for like both parties to move in a healthy direction, then that's like a decision that's going to be made. Because I've been in situations where I've held on to shit that just was no longer good for me, and the other person didn't care about what I was going through. Like they're just like, all right, like you holding on, like whatever. I'm gonna still do my own thing, but you can stay there if you want to. Versus someone that's gonna be more mature, that's just like, you know what, like this isn't working out. This is why it's all love. But
What do you think was making you hold on?
I was scared to be alone for a long time. Um, I think that stems a lot from my culture, from Mexican culture. It's like injected in our veins at birth that like, you know, the goals are to, you know, be pregnant, have a family, get married, be with a man, this and that. And that was like always commented in like a microaggressive manner, you know, at a young age. And when I was in situations where relationships weren't um like just like evolving, where they weren't growing, where they weren't healthy, where they weren't happy, you know, where it wasn't leading to marriage, I internalized that. And I was like, damn, like, am I not a good woman? You know, why don't they want to marry me? Like I've done this and that, you know, like I'm washing their clothes, you know, I'm making food, breakfast 3 times a day, like, you know, make sure they're good, talking to them about their mental, like I'm doing all this stuff that people say you gotta do to get a man. And like it's just not working. So I would internalize as like there's something wrong with me. So that's a big fear, you know, because when you're in a position where you don't know why something isn't working and you don't know what you're doing that's causing that, it's scary because it's like it feels like the situation's out of your control. Um, so I didn't know how to handle that at a young age, and the best way that I knew was just to stick it out because that's what women do. You know, you stand 10 toes and you ride with your man through anything, and so that's what I stuck to. That's what I knew. But man, I wish I had someone that was just telling me like, you know what, like you'll be good, like it's gonna be hard, you know, but you know, just talk to me and I got you and we'll get you through it. You'll find someone that's gonna treat you better. And I'm sure like I had my couple of people that just mentioned that once or twice, but I wish I had someone that was just like on me, like in a different way, like, you know what, like I'm gonna show you better instead of just telling you, like, come with me, do this, come with me, do that. So I was scared to be alone. And then up until recently is when I got to a more peaceful state with being alone. And like I know what I'm looking for in a long-term partner cuz like I don't like dating either. Like dating is mad strenuous, and it's just like I'm not good at opening up with people too.
Man, that's crazy because you came on here and started just opening up. I could tell that I kind of got that like, you gotta slowly open up that book.
I got a lot of chapters to me, and this is like the very like it's just like a little synopsis of everything, you know. But like opening up to multiple people that I don't really know what their intention is, I'm just like, makes me a little nervous. So I don't like dating, you know. So I'm very firm on like what I'm looking for in a long term partner, and I know now that like if someone isn't showing me, because like you could tell me, you know, you can tell somebody anything, but like I believe in patterns more than words. And if there's patterns there that are showing me that something's not working out, I'm okay with making the decision now to just be like, all right, like I gotta I gotta keep doing my own thing. This just isn't working out.
I feel like those conversations are important to have though, because I've definitely run into those situations where it's like, okay, this person's doing everything they possibly could for me, and they get frustrated with the position that we're in because to me, we're young as fuck still, bro. I'm 23 years old. I was just talking about it yesterday. Future thoughts. My only future thought is continue to grow this, and I'll see where I end up down the line. I have no future thoughts of okay, what do I want my life to look like? The biggest thing I've thought about recently is maybe buying a crib.
That's
That's it.
huge. Yeah, that's a
That's
big
it.
deal.
That's all I'm thinking about, and I'm only thinking about that because I'm so scared of like not progressing in life, right? So that's the only reason I've actually thought about it. I haven't really like, oh, it's a serious thing, but the fact that you mentioned internalizing like what's wrong with me? Why am I not enough? That's not a conversation that's had because a lot of the times, and it's both male and female, right? We're scared to actually say how we're feeling because we think, okay, this person's either A, not gonna understand us, B, they're not gonna care what we're telling them, or C, it's just like, well, what happens once we do have that conversation and they don't know what to say? Like, I can't act like I didn't say it, but I also don't want this relationship to just end at this point. And that's when you got to come to the terms. It's like, okay, once I do have this conversation, I got to have a set plan and be like, either I'm out or I'll ride with it until who the fuck knows when. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
What do you feel like changed for you?
I can't really think of a specific moment that like smacked me in the face, you know, that made me realize like I have to stop thinking like this. It was a series of events for me. I've done like 2 years of therapy when I was in school because the pandemic was just like literally driving me nuts. And I was really overwhelmed with everything I had going on. But as I was doing therapy, we like unpacked a lot of personal shit that I never really wanted to get into because it was just easier to kind of like leave in the vault, you know, and ignore. But they made me realize that like subconsciously I was being really catastrophic to myself by just avoiding these things and not talking about them and not opening up about them. And I started to see how it took a toll on like my actual physical health. You know, like I was getting really thin and like I wasn't like eating normally. Like I would eat like once a day maybe. And to some people that's cool, you know, some people fast and like it works for them. But for a student that's like real strenuous, you know. And it wasn't even cuz like I was forcing myself to eat once a day. I just like was so overwhelmed with my schedule that by the time I looked up, like it was just once that I was eating. So I started to see it in my face. And then, like, you know, Mexican families, they always comment on like image. They're like, oh, mija, te ves bien delgada, you know, tienes que comer. And I know a lot of people say that without harm. But when you're going through like heavy shit to the point where you like are forgetting to eat or like only having time to eat once a day, that little reminder is like triggering. And I started to be more aware of that with my family and how I felt when they would tell me that. So it was just like an array of things and experiences where I sat with myself, like freshly moved into my new apartment, and I was just like, this is a new beginning for me. Like, if I continue what I've been doing for the past couple years since I've been 25, I'm not gonna keep this. Like, it's just gonna keep repeating and I'm gonna be sitting here crying like, why is this happening to me and miserable? So I just finally decided to, after learning everything I did in therapy and having the tools that I have now, I just finally took a stand and made a decision like, all right, like, it's time to start fresh and just like try something new. And if it doesn't work out, it doesn't work out, but I'm gonna just keep trying to be better because all that other shit is just, I'm good.
And one important thing you mentioned about therapy was that you advocate for it, but it's a journey, right? And I took your quote. You said, although you're going along your journey to a healthier path, other people are still moving at their pace and it can be conflicting. So elaborate on that.
I ran into this realization when I started trying to improve communication with my family. 'Cause remember, I told you, like, the marriage dynamic between my parents was like very chaotic communication wise. And that bled into like how my siblings communicate as well. And that avoidance is still there when it comes to conflict. Like, like a Theo can come over and like piss everybody off because, they're acting belligerent or something. And then, everybody talks shit for like a week or whatever, but not straight to the Theo. And then like when they see him again, it's like, oh, hi, how you been? Like, miss you. So I think like when I started to realize how deeply rooted that shit was in my family, like from my grandparents on down, it overwhelmed me because it felt like more of a challenge than like a growing phase. It just felt like another obstacle that I had to get across to try and like mend a relationship between my parents. And then once you encounter those situations where say you're trying to communicate to them, right? And they're still being themselves, nothing's changed, reacting the way they react that may be triggering for you, that now you're aware of these triggers where maybe you weren't once before, you take offense to it because you're like, I did anyway. I was like, damn, man, I'm putting all this work in. I'm trying to better myself. I'm doing this, I'm doing that. And like, I feel like you're not trying to work with me right now. And that, like, that shit was pissing me off. And that was a challenge where you have to separate, like, I had to separate my ego from the situation and be like, okay, well, just because I'm doing these things for myself doesn't mean one, everybody has that same opportunity to do so right now, you know? And then two, like, if I'm gonna do it for myself, it has to be for me. And I have to learn how to accept people for who they are, especially my parents, because I feel like we hold our parents to like a higher standard than just regular human beings or even family members. But they're human too. And they each individually have their journey to go through if they want to heal, to heal with their children and heal those bonds. And what I had to learn was that, like, it just may not be the time. That doesn't mean that it's not going to happen. But, right now I just need to take the time to continue working on myself, building my foundation so I'm solid. So if say my parents ever need to fall down on me emotionally, like I'm good and I can handle it. And then, just take whatever situation is thrown to me from there and just work with it. I would never regret going to therapy. Like, I love it. And I think everybody should have the opportunity of just having that outlet where it's not biased and you can just like really be yourself in a room or try and be yourself in a room and open up and like, declog yourself from traumas or toxicity or whatever. But it's not like, it's not a cure. There has to be work that happens afterwards in order to continue that flow for yourself. Like, you can't just go to therapy and be like, all right, man, I'm done. I had my last session. Like, I'm good. I'm a brand new person. It's just like, no, you're the same person. Like, you're the same person you were 5 minutes ago. Now you just know more.
Was that a misconception you had before going to therapy?
Yeah, man. I thought I was gonna do, a year of therapy and I was gonna be fresh. My brain was gonna feel good. I was gonna be solid. I was gonna be a real happy girl. And it got a lot harder after therapy because I'm sensitive just in general. But after therapy, I was just very, very sensitive and like mindful of different things.
Ignorance is bliss. So now you know more. Now you know more about yourself and understand, like, man, this is not good for me, which puts more stress on you because you're like, I know this isn't good for me, but am I going to keep it around or am I going to remove myself from the situation? And when you're removing yourself from situations, it's going to hurt you as much as it is if you stay in the situation. The only difference is now this is going to be a temporary hurt rather than a constant hurt.
Because now you have different tools that can buffer the reactions that you might have had before, so it doesn't sting as much.
What do you feel like was one of the largest obstacles you had to overcome?
Just in general, or
I would say one of the largest personal obstacles, one of the biggest things you had to work through in therapy, and something that might even still be impacting you.
I think a big thing for me is I don't want to let my family down. And that's always in the back of my head. Like, what does my mom think of what I do? What does she think about me going to school? Like, you know, how's my sister reflecting on like what I'm doing? Like, is it resonating with her? Does she care? Same thing with my dad and my brother. Like, they're always in the back of my head, and I like with every single thing that I do, I want to make them proud. Like, I do it for myself too, because I enjoy the things that I do, but that's really important to me. So, um, the struggle there was learning how to maneuver their way of expression and not taking it personal. Because, again, back to the communication point, like some people are more expressive than others, and some people communicate their love in different ways. Like for example, like my sister, like I'm a hugger. Like, I love hugging. Like I'm a very affectionate person. My sister's not. So a challenge with her that we had for a while, like I would feel some type of way because she didn't want to hug me, or she would go like this when I would try and hug her. But it wasn't personal, it just wasn't her thing. So it was those moments where like I had to check myself and be like, all right, it's not personal. Like my family, they are who they are and they love me regardless. And whether they tell me or not that they're proud of me, like I know that they are. So just moving forward with grounding myself with those thoughts was probably and is still like a work in progress for me.
I think that just goes back to the communication thing within the, Hispanic heritage, right? Your parents, a lot of the times, they don't communicate that they're proud of you. I don't think my dad's ever told me he's proud of me, but I went to work with him, right? And we got split up, and I ended up working with one of the dudes that he's worked with before. And I'm telling him, like, oh, yeah, my dad's George. And he's like, you're George's son? He's like, you're the one that went to college? I'm like, yeah. And he's like, oh, man, your dad's so proud of you. Like, he talks about you for real. I'm like, for real? I like, this some shit I would never know, cause like my dad don't be fucking saying shit to me. We go hoop and that's it. That's our one-on-one time. So, hearing that, it definitely made me feel some type of way because that's not something I've ever heard him tell me. My mom's told me she's proud of me, but that's different, right? Your mom's always gonna show you love no matter what.
I get what you mean, yeah.
I wanted to hit more so on a wound you had to heal from during therapy because a lot of the times you're going through all these very personal things, very traumatic experiences that shape you into this person that you become. It changes the mindset and the way that you carry yourself. What do you feel like was one of those things that really impacted you?
So my grandfather was killed in '08, I think '09, from an accident. And I carried this guilt with me from that point. Um, one, because I was young. I was in like eighth grade or some shit. I was young when it happened, so you know how people are in Mexican families. You're like, kids mind, kids business. Like, let the adults handle it. And at that time, that's very much how it was because they were going to court and dealing with all that shit. So I've just felt like a sense of guilt from that point throughout my entire life of like feeling like I didn't do enough, you know, or feeling like life just wasn't fair and took my grandfather away sooner than I wanted him to leave. And I don't know, I just always carried this guilt with me that like I just could have done more as a granddaughter to experience life with him more. You know how it is when someone, passes away, you're just like, damn, like, I could have went over his crib more every Sunday, instead of every other Sunday or something. Or I could have been more present in that conversation at the time. Or I could have went on that walk with him instead of just being inside on my Game Boy or something. So it's just like these little instances that built up into like a big ball of guilt that would like hang over me. And it did for a long time until I went to therapy and I talked through it, and then it actually started bleeding into like the guilt portion of it started bleeding into me as a student cuz I was struggling like like yeah, like I love talking about this shit, but school's hard. Like college is really hard for different reasons. Like you have the financial aspect of it, and I don't come from money, so a couple grand, like 5, 6, 7, 10 grand for school is a big deal to me. So you have that hovering over you, right? And then I was getting guilt, like damn, like if I start a family, like they gotta walk into this debt. And then like I've always had a really busy schedule, but I didn't know how demanding the university was gonna be for me. And it was very demanding, like mentally, physically, emotionally too. And then coming off of like virtual learning from the pandemic, it was a big switch. So I wasn't performing to my standards, of what I'm used to performing and excelling in. So there was a sense of guilt as a student that I'm like, damn, like, man, I should be doing more. I could be doing more. Like, why am I not doing well? I'm gonna be a failure for my family, or I'm gonna be a bad example for my siblings. But in reality, like, I just had my plate way too full and I didn't know how to set my boundaries. And I was just like, I was stretching myself too thin, to the point where I just wasn't good anywhere. But anyway, as a student, that's where that guilt from. So therapy taught me to like just be more realistic with the situations that I was involved in and not only acknowledge like the choices that I made that may have led me there, but also acknowledge the things that are beyond my control or that were beyond my control at the time. And I think being able to take a step back and kind of just not wipe away my emotions, but just set them to the side and look at things just like a little more practically, it eased the guilt off my shoulders little by little.
Do you feel like you're healed from that specific incident, or do you feel like it's still impacting you to this day?
No, I'll never be okay for that from that. And I've accepted that. Um, they say grief is just the love that you aren't able to express anymore to that physical person anymore. And, that was my blood. Like that's like he's part of the reason why I'm here. Like without him there is no Yesenia, there's no Yaya, nothing. So him being that role in my life, like I'm never gonna not think about him and I'm never gonna experience the hurt that I experienced as a child when I lost him. And I know it's gonna hurt every single year. It's gonna be just as intense, for his birthday, for the anniversary of when he passed. But I've accepted that. And I think that's okay for it to happen. If it's just happening on those 2 days, that's cool. If it happens, where you're really, really down a week because then I'm kind of talking to myself at this point. If it happens where I'm really like down for a week and I'm just thinking about my grandpa, like I'm gonna just let that ride, because I believe in like beyond Earth and the universe and spirits and what have you, and I've translated it now to like maybe I don't know, maybe he's trying to communicate or maybe he's trying to show me something that I can't see. I still believe in him guiding me. It's just in a different manner now.
Ed Sheeran just released a new album called Subtract, and the whole album is detailing kind of grief and growing from grief because he lost his best friend who helped him break into the industry, who helped him be who he is today. And in the song Boat, he says, "They say that all scars will heal, but I know maybe I won't." And I think that, man, that shit hit because accepting that maybe I won't be okay. Maybe it will never be okay for me to feel whole again. And I know I have this scar, but I'm just going to learn to live with it. And that's what a lot of us have to do as we grow up, right? We keep getting beaten and bruised, and you learn to live with it, but you still don't let it change who you are, and you just stay a good person.
Or you try to, yeah. You try and continue to be a kind person. It can change you, man. You never know. And like even something like grief led me, like leads me back to neuroscience because I think about like the chemical reactions that happen and the hormones that are released when you're sad versus happy. And it's just like aside from like the pollution things that I mentioned before that affect human health, like interactions like that can be catastrophic to someone, like especially children. Like children going through situations where their parents are being separated and the household's really chaotic, and there's that constant stress factor, like it does trigger inflammation to the human body and it can restructure how your brain works, so I think the more that people can start to realize that like grieving is okay. Like grieving is normal. And it's normal to have extensive periods, if not to grieve that person forever, depending on the connection. Like that's totally fine because when you go against your grief and try to ignore that shit, or try to resolve it with catastrophic ways like, addiction, substance abuse, that's when things can get crazy. And that can cause further damage. You don't have to heal from something, but like, I guess just knowing that like you have the options to move forward and work through that.
Being able to learn from these situations and become a better person, that's that's the goal. Because if you just let it take over you and you let it beat you and you allow yourself to fall into this hole, yeah, it's okay to be in that place once in a while, but you can't let it consume you because once it consumes you, you're looking at all the negatives and there's a lot more life to live rather than saying that, damn, this happened to me at 18, 19 years old. It's just there's just so much more that can happen. Don't let it all end right at that moment. But shit, man, I appreciate you coming through. I appreciate the conversation. I appreciate you for being so open and just having good energy today. I something I needed. I was not having it today.
Oh, really? Yeah, this was like it was so chill, it was real mellow. It's nice to just sit and talk and not have it be like some formal crazy interview, but just more of like a conversation.
That's gonna be all, guys. Make sure you go ahead, like, comment, subscribe. Make sure you pop out to Club Yaya every second Sunday at Twisted Cantina. Sad boys for real. Peace out.
This is Sad Boy Radio.